It's Feedback Friday. I am not going to sing. I can't sing. Here, ha. There, I did the ha. I'm too still COVIDy to manage the singing right now. This is going to be short. This is mostly an I'm still alive video. Though the comments were pretty cool on Monday's video. I'm going to take a few just because it's Feedback Friday, and I do feel temporarily. I've been warned that there is a rebound on COVID sometimes, so we'll see. But yeah, I'm gonna do the help support this channel now. I can't do my typical drug company side effect voice for this because of lung capacity, but help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/LeannaK. I did manage to get through all my paid Leanna Care sessions this week. I don't know how. But yeah, if it weren't for Patreon supporters, I would have had no income for, the period of this illness, because otherwise it's you don't work, you don't get paid. So that's why stuff like Patreon is so important for content creators like me, because it gives us, 2 whole whopping sick days. Sorry. I missed the mute, but why am I muting on video? You can see me coughing. It's an old radio habit. But yeah, so one of the things I posed to the patrons is a question of, one thing I've noticed with the whole COVID thing is my tolerance for bullshit is in negative integers. I am, one would say she does not suffer fools, but I'm not suffering anything right now. So I asked the patrons, and I'll go based on what the comments say there, whether I'm not going to do content until my tolerance for bullshit has come back up to the not great but present level that it normally is, or whether I'll start doing content again. I just won't read the comments. It'll be up to the patrons. 'Cause yeah, I have lost my callus for Twitter. Twitter just 3 days was all it took for me to think this shit is crazy. That's neither here nor there. No, let's get to a couple of comments. One, I was glad a commenter said about the study. They said, reading that study was wild. Every marker of testosterone exposure they used was indirect. The one marker that seemed to have a significant effect on the outcomes was muscle mass, which is also the one marker that I would argue has to be somewhat actively cultivated. It definitely ends up reading less like men have evolved to be more exposed to testosterone in order to be more like warriors, and more like men who emulate a warrior archetype will also tend to be competitive with an outgroup and or cooperative within their in-group. And I agreed. It was wild to read it. And yeah, you have to, and this is the big problem with anything gender. I'm not sure I've said it before on YouTube. I say it all over the place. But the real problem with all of this gender stuff is there's all these theories about exposure to prenatal testosterone and what's nature versus nurture, but absolutely no one can ethically experiment on children or fetuses, like fetus still in utero. Even fetal tissue research is controversial. So it's a problem with understanding cisgender people, but it's also a real challenge with trans medicine, because everything's sort of in the fields. It's a harm reduction approach. We don't know The Economist a while back wrote a really, really good article on the challenges of medicine for transgender teens and puberty blockers. And it was challenging because The Economist leans conservative on certain things. And, even economically liberal people in the UK right now tend to lean not down with the trans stuff, but, this is why it's important to read stuff you disagree with sometimes, because, the valid point of we just don't know, because nobody's going to experiment on minors. Nobody is going to do a double-blind study that takes already vulnerable teenagers, gives them a placebo drug, and let's wait to see what happens when they start, developing secondary sex characteristics, even though they thought they were on puberty blockers, so body dysphoria goes crazy. No one's willing to do that for understandable reasons, right? So, it is a real challenge for medical science. And then the question is, what do we do about that? And that's why, because I am not a biochemist, I stick to what I can do, which is culture and dealing with the parts of it that are socially increased, socially enabled, socially whatever you want to call it. I know social construct is a charged term now. That's all I can deal with. That's what I know. And I think it's really, really important to stay in one's wheelhouse about this. And that's why it's nice. The other comment along similar lines, I enjoyed this. It's really rewarding, let me tell you, when I put something out there, and this is why I'm very selective about the documentation like this that I do share, because I want it to be positive, right? Because I know people are going to read it, and I know people are going to take it seriously. So, another commenter said, every woman wants children according to evolutionary psychology. It may be an assertion, however flawed, made by evolutionary psychology, but it misses one massive factor. Evolution doesn't just work at the individual or even species level. It also works at a social level. That is, every social group can be considered its own organism for the sake of evolutionary competition and selection pressure. So it's not that women want children. It's that evolutionary pressure on social groups, that is civilizations, favor groups that have a positive growth rate, that is, have more children that survive. Obviously, those with a negative growth rate will die out and be lost to evolutionary theory. Now consider some numbers. Prior to 1840, with the advent of modern medicine, childhood mortality, dying by 5 years old, was a fairly steady 45% across different civilizations. Excuse me. As far back as any records I can find. Add in stillbirths, around 5%, and youth mortality, dying before the end of puberty, roughly 15 years old, and a substantial majority of pregnancies never survive to reproductive age, to a degree that is unimaginable by today's standards. And the comment goes on and on and on and on, but go ahead and read it. But you get the point. This is why I like to keep the comment sections readable so that I can share. And it goes on, really, really good data. And to close, so these evolutionary pressures existed to shape societies for thousands of years, and then in a mere 200 years, technology and medicine have advanced to a degree that completely trashes the assumptions that go into those carefully built and refined societal frameworks. Some people hold on to the stability of what was proven to work, while others decide they're going to rebuild society from scratch without a solid grasp of the implication and consequences of their choices. Everyone else is stumbling around in a world where the ground is constantly shifting. And I think that's well said. And it's cool to be able to talk about this stuff. This is obviously somebody who has, a different background than I do, and writing versus talking, colloquialisms versus more technical terms, so on and so forth. This is why it's nice to share, why I prefer to share opinions and perspectives instead of going the no, you're wrong, here's why you're wrong thing. I think it is just much more productive to collaborate. And that's not a touchy-feely thing. That's a completely rational thing for me. You just, Isaac Newton, if I've seen further, it's because I have stood on the shoulders of giants, right? We don't get anywhere if we're just tearing everything down and starting from scratch because there's a little tiny flaw in the brickwork, right? I've given up on the greater world in terms of social theory. It's just academia is fucked. Politics is fucked. Corporate world is fucked for the foreseeable future in terms of culture. Society will stumble forward somehow, but right now, just everything's broken. Everything is so divided. There are almost no common narratives in society right now. And so all we can do, because there's no decider, right? All we can do is build a community ourselves that does something productive. And I really don't care about macro culture. Like, I don't. It's uninteresting to me personally. As an academic exercise, as like a thought experiment, it's just a general interest. It's like an ant farm. Yeah, cool. You're getting unfiltered Leanna right now. The INTJ is coming out hard. But studying cultures, I think, interests me because I so don't care what big picture cultures do. I care about the people I directly and to a certain degree indirectly associate with. You can't insist on morality and fairness in macro. Everything is just too driven by the stories people can make stick and not actually on facts. And I know that's part of the reason people cling so much to one perspective or another. And one of the reasons I have continued with Manly Mondays despite the pushback is because it's amazing what we don't know, as what the commenter said, can only be indirectly measured. And that's why I'm so distrusting of certainty on any of this stuff. So again, thank you, especially a week I was sick. There was good comments the last time I checked. So I really, really appreciate, especially when I am compromised. One of the things about when I get sick, I do a lot of thinking, a lot of rabbit holes, which is part of the reasons my tolerance for bullshit goes. And so I'm going to tackle a topic that's probably fun to answer. It was the first question that came in, I believe. No, it was one of the first. Someone asked, is the TERF mindset rooted in or correlated with misandry? You know that Emperor's New Groove meme? Both. Why not both? It's chicken and the egg, right? I mean, it is undeniable. And this is not my opinion. This is just history. It is undeniable that the modern day TERF movement has its origins in the protest second wave feminism, things like the Scum Manifesto, which were actively man-hating. Now, there's a debate on how much of that was performative and how much of that was reactionary and how much of that was just dyed in the wool. These women hated men. there were known divisions within the feminist movement between sort of more, we'll say, heteronormative feminism, and then what Betty Friedan coined the Lavender Menace, the lesbian wing of feminism, who didn't want gains for women to be structured around the nuclear family because they were lesbians. Betty Friedan later in her life deeply regretted branding the lesbian wing of feminism as any sort of menace. And this is what's interesting, because a lot of that very militant feminism, there was a lot of overlap between the Lavender Menace, and that's what's so strange about that becoming a portion of TERF feminism now is, and it's typical, right? The last people to get shit on find someone new to shit on. It's something that tends to happen. And it's really frustrating. And I think that's why it's important to read about this stuff and understand what came before, so you don't replicate the same damn mistakes. So it's a combination of definite misandry, and then I think there is probably some people that believe that in order for other people to gain, things have to be taken away from them. And that's weird, because that's a fucking privilege argument. And again, they should know better. Is it the only root of the TERF movement? No. I think there's a lot of biological essentialism in the TERF movement, but the question was specifically, is the TERF mindset rooted in or correlated with misandry? It doesn't say completely rooted in. Are there roots in misandry? If you imagine the TERF movement is sort of a bucket of misandry, and then, half the roots are here, and there's an arc, and then half the roots are in this other pot, and the other pot is essentially gender essentialism, that the belief that men and women are just inherently different, in ways that cannot be overcome. They don't believe in the Kate Bush song, about swapping places for better understanding. It's just, nope, can't swap places. The places can't be swapped. And then, then there's the weird question of, why are so many TERFs butch lesbians? Well, they're not the essentialists, right? And there is that, I think there is that everyone who is gender non-conforming in the face of this whole awakening with transgender identities, if this had been available to me when I was younger, would I have taken it? I've wondered that. I don't know. I think not. I don't know. It doesn't matter. I want there to be other choices for people that I didn't have, so I'm fine with that. Is there a possibility? Sure. Isn't that great that people have more options to them than when I was younger? Would I have had an easier time of it if what people assume from my outsides match what they get from my insides? Sure. I think it's possible to give people that option to validate their identity and then not force people to do it, because otherwise your life is miserable. Again, if we can have roots in multiple buckets, we can have branches going multiple places. Now, I know that's hard. I know that's really difficult, and it takes, this is when we get into big 5 personality traits and the idea of openness to new experiences, and then the ever-charged neuroticism element. if you're somebody who scores very high on openness to new experiences, this is easier for you than someone who isn't. And, if you're somebody who scores lower in, I quite frankly think they should change the term neuroticism on the big five, because it's got a negative connotation, and there's a I think a positive and negative to all of them. But if somebody must understand something completely before they move forward, well, what's going on is just moving too fast. And I completely understand that. And I say this because I don't want people to take my comments that everybody that is the TERF mindset rooted in or correlated with misandry for me to say both. I don't want people to think that everyone who isn't down with trans people yet, or down with the idea of trans people, or this, I'm fine with trans people, it's the trans ideology I have problems with. And the reason I seem sarcastic, with the, remember I said I have no tolerance for bullshit. What comes next is strictly my personal opinion and my emotional reaction to things. Do not call it anything it's not. But I hear trans ideology and I hear the Jewish problem. I have no problem with Jews, but the Jewish ideology, do you know what they do? I've got no problem with the people. They can't help it. But did you know that they use the blood of Christian babies to make matzah? That's what I hear from a particularly emotional level. Watch YouTube demonetize me for that. Like I said, my bullshit meter, negative integers right now. And I think that's why I push back so hard on this, that, and I am a literal redheaded stepchild. Rest in peace, my stepfather. But there are people, like people that I am really great friends with now, that know about Jews, know we have different dietary habits, but they invited us. I met friends, the youth pastor friends, and they knew we were kosher, but they didn't know what it meant. So it was this really awkward, like, can you eat barbecue? And it was very nice. They knew what they didn't know. And that is a completely different bucket of people from Jewish space lasers, right? And that's why I think it's very, very important that not all TERFs are misandrist, and not all people that aren't totally comfortable or not totally understanding of trans people are transphobic or TERFs, right? There's a lot of overlap on this complicated Venn diagram, but we do need to make room for nuance, because all we can do is walk with the people who will walk with us. And this is true about Manly Mondays. This is true about all this gender stuff. This is this is true of people with, and quite frankly, my opinion is that if we can, the whole trans stuff is gonna make, if handled properly, is gonna make things better for cisgender people as well. And that's not a moral argument to do it. The moral argument to do it is it's just right. I don't care what somebody else does to themselves. Is it hurting anybody else? No, then I don't care. Do what you want, I'm fine with people who, if people, not going to do it because I'll get accused of transphobia. It's the way my brain works, but that's a simple moral arc. People should be able to do what they want with their own bodies, period, end of story, with everything, right? But that wasn't the question. I'm just covering my ass on the question. And it's interesting. I do think it's interesting how complicated this stuff gets. And it's very important to embrace that complexity instead of looking for false simplicity. Because I don't know if you've seen that one panel comment about there's two doors, simple and wrong, complex and correct. And the simple and wrong door is just this, lengthy line of people walking through the door on right off a cliff. And then there's one guy at the top of the hill for the complex and correct door. But it is undeniable just historically, like I said, that the TERF playbook, the fundamentals of what we used to call gender essentialist feminism, which is, of course, the Andrea Dworkin school of feminism. That's what we used to call it. But they didn't like the term gender essentialist. So it's the typical thing of people try to step away from a pejorative and they ended up accidentally landing on what it actually is. But I'll do you one better. I don't think we should, and this is something I'm going to train myself away from. I'm practicing. It's just too easy to say TERF, right? It just sounds good. TERF, 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 TERF. It sounds like an alien language, right? Like dupe or I am Groot. TERF, 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 TERF. It sounds like rhubarbing in old movies. But what it actually is anti-trans activism. Let's decouple it from feminism. So that, because that's too complicated. Is it anti-trans? Yes. Is it feminist? Maybe. Because, I just traced it back to parts of feminism that were just misandrist as well. So it's not just TERF. Of course. Find any group of people. You will find a subset of that group that hates another group of people. Hateful people exist. And the thing we can be most effective with this is just, we don't do that here. You're allowed to have your own opinions as long as you are not rude to the other people here, because they have as much right to be here as you do. And if they're rude to you, same rules apply. And I think that's better than, and that's why it's very important to declare when something is a purely emotional statement, a purely historical statement that you're not emotionally connected to, and then other stuff somewhere in between. It's really important, which is why I make the big distinction between I think and I feel. Because that matters. Because we can only really solve these problems if we do that. All right, I'm going to stop now because all of a sudden brain is crashing. But I made it. I made it almost a full half hour. Nobody's more surprised than I am there. Okay, here we go. Help support. Here we go again. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/Leanna K. Or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it. Coffee.com/Leanna K. Thanks for watching. Have a good weekend, and hopefully I'm healthier next week.